I'm
Okay.
very into doll nowadays.
All right. So we're going to start now. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. I'm James Shaheen, Tricycle's editor-in-chief. We're here for a live conversation with Tibetan Buddhist scholar and author Robert Thurman to celebrate the launch of his new book, Wisdom is Bliss, 4 fun, friendly facts that can change your life. The book, it's a good title, Bob. The book explores the core teachings, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path as part of the Buddha's educational super curriculum for understanding the nature of reality. I have to say the language is innovative in this book. It's wonderful fun. So today's Zoom session will be recorded for anyone who is unable to attend live, and we'll make it available on Tricycle's YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat in case you want to share it with friends who can't be here, or if you want to watch it again. We are providing these events for free, so if you haven't already and would like to support Tricycle, please consider giving a donation at the link in the chat. We're also putting the link to Tibet House. You can give to them as well. We will leave time for a Q&A at the end of this hour-long session. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. So again, our host today is Professor Robert A.F. Thurman. Bob is the J. Tsongkhapa Professor.
Emeritus. Yeah, retired.
Emeritus. Okay, Emeritus. Congratulations. I probably didn't say that to you earlier. Of Indo-Tibetan Studies at Columbia University, as well as co-founder and president of Tibet House US, Mandala, in service of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and the people of Tibet. A close friend of the Dalai Lamas for over 50 years, Bob is a leading worldwide lecturer on Tibetan Buddhism, passionate activist for the plight of the Tibetan people, translator of Buddhist texts, and writer of popular Buddhist books, including his latest, Wisdom is Bliss, 4 fun, friendly facts to change your life. We will also link to that book. All of that notwithstanding, all of those lofty credentials, Bob is a very grounded guy. And I just have to say, sort of off script, that in the early years of Tricycle, it wasn't easy finding people who had both editorial skills and an interest in Buddhism. And when we did find one, we would ask them, how did you get interested in Buddhism? And far more often than not, they'd say, I took one of Professor Thurman's courses. So that's how we got our early employees before they went to graduate school to study with him or others again. So in the Tricycle office, we have a merit meter, Bob, and you're way up there with Shari Putra and the others. So thank you.
I don't know.
Okay, so we're happy to have you here. Hi, Bob.
That's great. Hi, how are you, James? Thank you very much for having me and for having my Wisdom is Bliss book, which I am promoting nowadays in the traditional popular book manner. And I'm having such fun doing it, actually. Wisdom is Bliss, and also promoting Wisdom is Bliss is fun as well, because people are surprised about it, and the title even. And actually a Boston Cabot lady, very sweet one, elderly like me, and senior, let's say, like me, and venerable like me. We're about the same age. She said, "How can you say that wisdom is bliss when the world is in tatters?" And I said, well, that's all the more reason to discover that wisdom is bliss.
Well, tell us
at any time, all the loonies or the nature or the misguided and misdirected planet, by the crazy loyal monsters. And so, wisdom, it better be bliss is all I can say.
But explain a little bit. I wasn't going to start with the title, but let's start with it. Why is wisdom bliss? Tell us.
What's that?
Why is wisdom bliss? Tell us.
Yeah, reality is, well, that's why wisdom is bliss, because reality is bliss. And reality is, of course, when you say reality is bliss, it's the kind of bliss that is equally at home with non-bliss. Because when you get to reality from the Buddhist scientific point of view, no single binary term will be sufficient. One great thing about Buddha, why I love Shakyamuni Buddha as a scientist, is that he said, well, I now know everything and I'm so happy about it. Unfortunately, I just somehow can't explain it to you because it is beyond any formula, any explanation. Mathematics, Einstein, Schrodinger, whoever it might be, they just will not be. It will not be capturable by any of their formulae or any poetical one or anything. But it can be evoked by different things, by vectors that go this way and that way, and especially anything that encourages people to develop a tolerance of cognitive dissonance without exploding their head, being able to hold opposite things in their mind. And that's because we are just not prepared in our binary world of conceptuality for a reality of the universe that is more amazing. It's more amazing grace than we ever could have imagined could be possible. And that, which is wonderful, And of course, we take that as encouragement, but even that, he always said, is not describing it thoroughly. You just have to experience it. And then what I can do, though, he said, is two things. One, I can encourage you that you too can understand it if you're a human being with a human brain. You don't have to be highly educated. You don't have to be a mathematician or whatever. Every human being potentially can understand it. And two, I will give you the educational curriculum through which you can come closer to understanding it, if not understand it completely. So those two encouragements he gave, as in lieu of being able to just give them a formula they could just hang on to, oh, that's what reality is, and if I just repeat that formula or, quote, believe in it, I'll be fine. That won't work, he said. It's like His Holiness once recently, actually, I didn't hear this particular thing, but I recently met someone who, actually, at the minute, I can't remember their name, but that's a senior privilege. But she said she was at a world religion thing with His Holiness, and different world religious leaders were there, and they're all saying, well, I believe this, and I believe that, and I believe this, and I believe that. And then finally someone said, Your Holiness, what do you believe? And he said, belief. He said, belief can be a trap sometimes, he said, because you kind of get stuck on your belief. He says, I wouldn't say, therefore, that I believe this or that primarily, although, of course, I believe that the floor is underneath me, he said, but I'm open to reality, is what he said. Mm-hmm. And she said she was so flipped out when that happened, when he did that. It felt so relaxing in the climate of everyone having a belief that, that other ones didn't necessarily share, And I don't even know which thing it was. I think it was in Europe. And but I'm like, yay, I'm a big fan, of course, of His Holiness.
Of course. Well, you've known him for 50 years. I mean, you were both in your 20s when you met. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the book. You've written so many books. I've read most of them, I'm sure, about all sorts of topics. And you have a depth of knowledge few have when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism, at least among Westerners, and perhaps among Tibetans. And yet you decided that this book would be on the fundamentals, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. How did you come to that decision?
Well, because I'm against exclusivism, like following my teacher. And, in a way, wisdom is bliss, coming from the tantric expression of Unexcelled Yoga Tantras, of what they call bliss, void, indivisible, or bliss, empty, indivisible, in the sense of what they call clear light, of ultimate reality, of emptiness, is only known by bliss. It cannot be known by conceptual consciousness. It's known by when, in a certain stage, when the entire body is completely given over to bliss, and the sort of self-centered, controlling subjectivity has released and melts into that ultimate reality. So it's not something that is cognized or known as an object outside of the self. It has to be, the self has to melt into it. And so that wisdom is bliss kind of comes from that. But I want to say, and I do say in the book, that this is also taught in the Theravada Buddhism. it's taught in regular exoteric Mahayana Buddhism. It's really the essence of everything that Buddha, his presence actually on the planet, is this, like a happy, because he was Mr. Happy, once he was enlightened. One of his favorite names is Sugata, which means Sukhamgata, which is, one of his names is, Gata is the past participle of to go. So it means gone, and it means gone in the sense of having realized, cognitively gone. And so Tathagata means gone into suchness, which means having realized the nature of reality by giving oneself to that reality and becoming it in a way. And but Sukhamgata means giving oneself to bliss. And that one of his best names, Sugata, the Sukham becomes Sugata. So I just, otherwise people say, oh, well, I have no highfalutin thing. I can't realize bliss. All I can do is get out of the world into Nirvana. If you're a very card-carrying, very strongly exclusivist focus on Theravada style, Vipassana, and that sort of thing, or Mahayana non-dualism, but still, I don't know about bliss, compassion maybe. Wisdom is compassion, ultimately. But then again, what is compassion made of? So compassion is made out of the combination of empathy and bliss, actually. Because, of course, empathy only feels the suffering of the being for whom one feels compassion. But what one radiates to that being to help them out is bliss, has to be bliss. Because if you're equally miserable as the other person, it's not likely you're going to be much help to them.
Okay, Bob, I have a question. You make me think of something that you wrote in the book. You said we're ambivalent or sometimes even unwilling to allow ourselves to fully experience that happiness or bliss. You say that. So why don't you say something about why would we not allow ourselves to fully experience
okay, I certainly will. Well, I do say also in the book that I feel also that in history, and this goes for Eastern cultures or civilizations as well as Western cultures, the mass of the people tend to be more or less terrorized by the authorities, and not necessarily by Jesus and Muhammad and Moses and so on, by the founders of the sort of great ideological, great religious traditions, spiritual traditions, but by once they become organized, including once Buddhism becomes organized, people tend to be terrorized by the authorities that, they're supposed to be suffering. Life is a vale of tears, it's a valley of the shadow of death, just be resigned to your, wisdom is be resigned to your misery. And then if you hold your faith, if you follow the king, if you die for the unknown soldier tomb, or you labor without really tearing up much, but you do your duty, and then the high priest guarantees that God will put you in heaven, that you'll go with Dante, something good will happen later, but life is supposed to be miserable. And so therefore, Protestants, certainly, if you come Protestant ethic, you have to work, and prove your worth by productivity, and then you don't expect even to feel, in fact, it's highly suspect. The essence of the Protestant ethic is if you feel the presence of the holy thing, it's probably Satan. Yes, that's what they tell you. And so the point is, Buddha didn't say that. Yes, Buddha said, if you insist on stubbornly being unenlightened and self-centered, it'll be frustrating, and nothing that you do that you think is normally like a little relief or a little happiness will last, and you'll be dissatisfied with it, so everything is suffering if you're like that. But that doesn't mean you're supposed to be like that. That means you're supposed to note that that's not the way to find real happiness, because third noble truth, the reality of things is happiness, it is freedom, it is cessation of suffering, if you are open to experiencing that and you really deeply feel it and you become one with it. And, James, I had a wonderful experience. I sensed this about the Pali literature, the Mahasangika, dualistic Buddhist, what I call individual vehicle. I never say lesser vehicle. I call it individual vehicle, because a universal vehicle, Mahayana, needs individuals have a vehicle, and they can either get on one first for themselves, and then they are naturally compassionate, or they can get on one sort of with everybody all together from the beginning. But it's not really therefore a big difference. And so I was reading the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the great focus of mindfulness. I don't like the translation foundation, because anusthana means where you put your mind, not where you stand and put it somewhere else. So I think focus is better, but anyway, I'm just fussy like that. That's a translator's fuss. So the large focus, the shorter one that I had always basically been exposed to, it doesn't have this particular thing that the long one has, which is the last focus of mindfulness is, of course, mental objects, what they call dharma, which in that case means mental objects of the mind alone. And the last of those at the very end of that, which is quite elaborate, the long one, is the Four Noble Truths, as something you put your mind on. And then I was in Sri Lanka, actually, when I was reading it. All that again and again, I made it my mantra in Sri Lanka to read it. And, first, with the first noble truth of suffering, that of unenlightened suffering, there's a long list of any kind of positive experience you can possibly have, which says, well, but it's never good enough, and it doesn't last, so it's called the suffering of change. All right, fine. And long list. He doesn't just content to say that.
Right.
He gives a long list. Visual, sense cognition, audio, smell, taste, touch, etc. But mental, whatever it is. Then he does the cause, rather briefly, and then he comes to the liberation, the third noble truth, the real of the real. He himself says only the third is real reality. The others are illusory reality, but that's important to use illusory reality to free yourself from illusory reality. So they're still important, but they're not kind of the ultimate reality. Only the third one, Nirvana, Nirodha. So then he says, and there's Nirvana. It's like the prognosis of the medical description. And Nirvana means freedom from suffering, cessation, no more suffering. And then he says, this is what flipped me out. Now, where is this cessation of suffering? He says, where is it? And then he gives the same list he just gave in the truth of suffering. All the pleasant and agreeable things in the old-fashioned English translation. All the pleasant and agreeable sense experiences, mental experiences, whatever kind of experience. Same thing. So what's the difference? This is suffering. This is bliss, freedom from suffering. Well, the difference is when you understand the cause, you lose the craving, because they're not in the third noble truth level. Craving is gone. So that means that when you experience something agreeable at the third noble truth level, it takes you rather than you seize it with your craving for pleasure. The pleasure just takes you away, and you don't evaluate it. Oh, is this good enough? Can I have more? Whatever it is, you're very content with it. And you give yourself to it, so to speak. And so, because there's no craving, in other words, you're stifling the pleasure by wanting more, even as you're experiencing it, so you don't properly experience it. And this is non-dual. In other words, he doesn't say Nirvana is off in Alpha Centauri if you become a real one-pointed meditator and you leave your body and go someplace else. He doesn't say a dualistic kind of conclusion to Nirvana. He says it's just right here at all the pleasant things when you're free of craving. And I made a big shout, and that spread all over Sri Lanka. I was I was like, whoa, this is so great.
Well, Bob, let's talk about, I'm going to put my list of questions aside for a second, because you said so many things. One of them I wanted to ask more about is Nirvana. So I was very interested, and there you were as a very young man with Geshe Wangyal, your root teacher over in New Jersey. And and you were sitting trying to bliss out or find Nirvana somewhere. It wasn't here. It must be somewhere over there.
That's right. I was doing that.
He kept interrupting your meditation and trying to pull you away from meditation. Can you explain what that was about?
Right. Well, I don't know for sure yet, because I don't know anything for sure yet, because I'm not enlightened. I'm not a Buddha. I might be a bit informed, let's say, a little tweak of some sort of hints of things, but I don't claim to be enlightened. But what I think it was that I was going into the dhyanas. I was very interested in the immeasurable love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, the four dhyanas, which lead you into the four, as I would call them, four contemplations, which lead you into the realm of pure form, the Brahma-bodied realm, and you sort of get a relief from your ordinary desire realm embodiment when you go into those meditative planes. Although you do it within the embodiment, you find those planes in your mind. So I think that's what I had some affinity from previous life, maybe. And as soon as I read that, and he kept skipping the passages in the Nagarjuna's book that described them. He said, "Oh, you don't need this one," and he would jump 3 verses. I would say, "No, that's the one I want." And then I would read it myself, and then I would go at night and try to meditate, and he would always knock on my door and interrupt me. And I was so frustrated with him, and about that. But then finally, I read something in the Vimalakirti Sutra, which I had the great good luck to be asked to retranslate, and from Tibetan. And in there he mentions that do not attain the cessation of sensation and conception at the wrong time. And I think that's what it would be. In other words, I think a certain type of person, not everyone, but a certain type of person can get a kind of level of wisdom where they get kind of cooled out. And from the Bodhisattva point of view, then, they lose a kind of passion for justice, to help others, to see the world go with them towards some sort of liberation. And they get sort of cool, and they still deplore injustice and suffering, but they kind of are removed from it. They're dissociated from it in a way where they don't really have an energy that makes them sort of empathetically bound to the suffering being, where that it drives their development very powerfully. And from it's all right if you're just seeking the arhat state, to be personally liberated, but that is all right. And even from the Mahayana point of view, if you do that and even attain nirvana at that state, you still go to Buddhahood. That is, you do develop the compassion, you do develop the ability to help others that a Buddha has, but it takes a long time because you don't come back into the sort of sweaty, earthy thing. You do it in a kind of celestial plane, very slowly. It takes aeons. They say, that's what they say. And the idea is, therefore, if you get too cooled out before you really have digested the immensity of relativity and the vastness of your interconnectedness with all life, then you will eventually get it too, but you will get it more slowly than someone who has less wisdom and self-cooling and more drive to cultivate, generosity, or compassion, morality, tolerance, creativity, the sort of outgoing, other-directed virtues, and you'll just more or less focus on the last two, the wisdom and the contemplation, and you'll still get to the same place, but it'll take you much longer. And then, of course, that is a sadness for those you're interrelated to. That happens to you, and maybe you feel a little, oh, gee, I wish I could have been doing more from all my mother beings sooner, which is the drive of the Bodhisattva, So I think that's what it was about. Or maybe in a less grandiose or sort of traditional method, let me just say, maybe I would have become addicted to meditating, and I wouldn't have developed learning, I wouldn't have studied, I wouldn't have tried to cope with, Mitch McConnell, Grant Newt Gingrich, Roger Nixon, all these beings over many decades, that were still there.
Also once your mother.
I wouldn't have had that focus at all, and I don't know, I would have had a different life, I think, quite.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, you chose the lay life. I mean, you're also known for writing a pretty remarkable book on Vimalakirti. You chose the lay life. You decided to disrobe. Geshe Wangyal probably always sensed that you would be a lay person.
He told me I should not try to be a monk.
Exactly.
Although I was living like a monk, and he said, as long as you're studying at a certain thing, you can certainly live like one. And it's great that you do that, no problem. He said, but you shouldn't be one because there's no institution for you, and that's not your karma. And I wouldn't listen. because I loved it so much, and I still do. I love Buddha Dharma. I really do. I think it's just the most wonderful thing, and that we had such a being on this planet with such wisdom. And nowadays, I more think of him as a scientist, actually, which is how I was looking. I was departing from Wittgenstein, and Socrates through to Kant and Hegel and Wittgenstein, and that's what I was looking for, is more realistic, even filling in gaps of theirs. And I found that in Nagarjuna, and then in the Buddha's own sutras, of course, pointed by Nagarjuna and Asanga and these kind of people. And great Dharmakirti, Chandrakirti, Tsongkhapa, and Longchenpa, and Sakya Pandita, what we call in Tibet the three Manjushris. And so that's where I always was. I was never really a big, probably my Protestant upbringing, very loose one, but still the aversion to like a copious, bounteous ritual, all enfolding ritual. And so I didn't have that kind of attitude. And I forgot what the question was, but anyway.
Well, the question was, no, it's just you do talk about in the
book. Yeah, that's right. So then he took me to see Dalai Lama after a couple of years with him, saying, well, I'm tired of you bugging me about being a monk. Maybe he'll make you a monk. So then I raised some funds from my grandfather and so forth, and I went over with him. And then he introduced me to Dalai Lama, and he actually said, in his first introduction, he said, well, this boy, very smart Western boy, very kind, very good attitude about Buddhism, already speaks the language very well, and he wants to be a monk. And he sincerely does. But please don't make him a monk, Your Holiness. I've told him not to, but he won't listen to me. Maybe he'll listen to you, but please don't make him a monk. But he wants to anyway, and so he thinks maybe you will. And but don't do it. But then he said, well, I don't even know. I'm an old Mongolian. You're the Dalai Lama. You do what you want to do, what you decide. So then His Holiness was a little slow about it. He didn't instantly ordain me like right on the spot. He took about 8 months to do it, and put me through some things. We had a lot of talks, and I studied with his teachers and so on. And studied medicine, and the Geshe-Wango made me study Tibetan medicine, which I love, which was very revelatory to me. And although not to be a doctor, but still, I really was. That was very important. And then he made me a monk. But then, about a year and a half onto being a monk, in the next year, 1966, back in the States, I realized, well, I'm not a Mongolian here in this ethnic community, being the local priest. And I don't speak Mongolian. He wouldn't let me learn Mongolian, actually. He said, there's so many politics here, you don't want to speak Mongolian. And then I began to realize, well, my friends were being beaten up in civil rights marches in Georgia, in Alabama. Other friends were protesting the draft and so on. And I wanted to be with them, and I would go out like the marching monks, like the Vietnamese monks in Vietnam. And then my monk, no, you can't do that. You either stay here or you have to leave. You can't be activist as a monk from our little New Jersey thing, because we are sort of visitors here in America. And he was not wanting to challenge sort of mainstream American attitudes from his monastery. He didn't want to threaten the Buddhist monastery. So small, tiny, little weak thing. And so finally I did go. And then at one point or another, I realized, oh, he's so right. However I'm going to develop, I have to do it in connection with developing relations with other beings. That's sort of obviously my karma. That's what he knew and I didn't know. Not to mention this mere practical thing. There's no real, Protestant ethic country doesn't have real support for monasticism, like Gethsemane, where dear Thomas Merton was. It's a huge, like 1,000 acres or something, many buildings, had like 30 monks, like 40 monks. And then they're selling their monasteries up and down the Hudson River, and the Catholic Church, because, we have a no free lunch attitude in our culture. So therefore, no people who are doing nothing that's productive. Well, yeah, they make jam maybe, but otherwise they don't work in a factory. They don't become billionaires, and they're useless. And we don't feel we feel they're parasites. We're a little bit like the communists in that line.
Okay, Bob. I wanted to ask you. A few minutes ago, you referred to the Buddha as a super scientist, a super educator.
Yes.
In the book, you say you also call him a social revolutionary,
Yes.
but not a prophet or a religious leader. So
Yeah.
what do we miss about the essence of Buddhism when we think of the Buddha as a religious leader? Why not? What do we miss?
Well, he is. I do acknowledge, and I share a conversation I had with His Holiness, that Buddhism might be 1/6 a religion as we define religions nowadays, which is like a belief thing that you believe, looking to someone else to save you, and some sort of ethical thing, and that's it. That takes care of it. And in that light, it's about 1/6 like that. And there are certain schools, like the Shin Buddhist school, where Amida will get you to the Pure Land, and the difference between Pure Land and Nirvana, the ordinary person doesn't make much difference about, even though the scripture does. I mean, they don't say that Pure Land is Nirvana, but it will help you get there quickly. And but about 1/6, in the sense that Buddha himself, he met God, Brahma, and actually, contrary again to some popular ideas about Buddhism, it's not an atheistic religion. I don't care what some modern Buddhists who want to be sort of secular people say. The gods are definitely still there, all the Brahminical gods. But Buddha doesn't say that there's one creator, so he rejects the idea that Brahma is the creator, and Brahma himself does in the dialogue with one of Buddha's disciples. In the actual Buddhist Pali Suttas, Brahma says, no, I didn't create it, and therefore I can't control evil, and I didn't create evil. And tell beings that when they have a hard time, I didn't do that to them. I do my best for them. So, and have Buddha tell that, so he becomes Buddha's disciple, actually. So they are gods, but they are not omnipotent, and we have to liberate ourselves. And Buddha himself, therefore, did not get commissioned by a god to say that God will save you if you believe in him, which is the usual founding of religions. Instead, Buddha said, there's a developmental process that you can go through, which I went through, middle way, blah, blah, all of that, and meditate and learn and be ethical in a certain way. And if you do that, you will yourself realize your own salvation, pursue it with diligence, and you can achieve it. So that makes it much more of a DIY, a DIY religion at best. Now, that doesn't mean that the regular layperson who was not joining the mendicant order, I don't say monk or monastic because it's not like Christian monasticism. It's a mendicancy, meaning full-time scholarship from the society to study as well as meditate. And to study yourself, and to study the world, and to study the teaching, and to integrate them in your realizations. And the lay people who don't do that, they best believe that what Buddha's doing and what the people are, the monks, the mendicants, and the female and male nobles are doing is a good thing, and they support that, and they feel that will help them in a future life, maybe, or later in this life, they'll get to be able to do that education themselves, but they don't otherwise much try to do that. And so for them, it's not necessarily just an education. It has like a religious aspect, of course, and they look to Buddha. And there might be some people who think Buddha is God in some agricultural society somewhere far away. But in a way, they are more, even though they may be illiterate, they're not stupid. And for example, they know that the statue is not Buddha. They're not idolaters. It just reminds them of Buddha. They know Buddha was a being who had a certain history. Do you know what I mean? They're not stupid even themselves, and they know that their actions will have a result, and they have to be generous, etc., and do at least the ethical thing. They have the ethical vow of the upasika and so on. So you can say it is a religion for them, but the main thing was to educate people. And I think today, personally, it is different from how it was in Asia, in that there are very few literate people, relatively speaking, nowadays. And therefore, everyone gets some kind of education. And therefore, that education should be shared with as many people as possible without insisting, following there, again, His Holiness's idea, without insisting that they become a Buddhist. And at first, my first 20 years with him, I would say, I kind of resisted that. And maybe I even thought he was just being strategic, saying, I don't want to convert anybody. Keep with your own religion. He did that from the beginning. He's so deep, His Holiness, really. But I didn't get it. And I thought, well, but don't we think that the Buddhist education is the best? It really is good for you. And no. Some people, I don't want to mess with them. I don't talk about shunyata with them. I don't talk about this and that. He kept insisting. And finally, I got it maybe 40 years ago, 35 years ago. One day, I happened to scroll by some preacher, on TV somewhere. I was in graduate school or something, and there was some guy preaching away. And then people were standing up for Jesus. And they're going, Jesus, Jesus. And then I thought, His Holiness is so kind. He really wouldn't want to be competing there and having people standing up for someone whose name they couldn't pronounce. What would be the point of that? I stand, well, okay, Tashbara, you're going to come and save me. No way. So, he really means it, and he meant it, that he wants everyone to stay with their grandmother's religion, but learn as much as they can from other religions. And he'll be the first to say, Buddhism has a lot to teach, even scientists, psychologists, not to mention people doing, self-development in some way or another.
Yeah,
but keep it within the other traditions. And then he did also say that he himself had a eureka moment with Thomas Merton first, and then later with other people, where he felt that the theistic path, monotheistic path even, let's say, could lead to enlightenment. And so he even wanted to say that the higher value can be reached without necessarily the Buddhist education by some sort of very strong yogi, like he mentioned. He always likes to mention one monk in Spain who meditated love all the time and then just looked at His Holiness, and His Holiness just sort of fell into his gaze and did feel like the love of Buddha, the love of Maitreya, the universal love in that gaze, So then, succeeding experiences like that made him feel that way. And so for these last 35 years, maybe, that I've been on that bandwagon, I've made a big effort. And actually, to my amazement, from having been, you'd think one would want to come back. My grandmother obviously was a Protestant, although I wasn't much educated and I didn't like a lot of aspects of it. I still don't. But, Jesus I always liked. And but I like Jesus as a rabbi. And I think his selflessness and turn the other cheek, this is very much rabbinical. I don't see the big difference in a way that the Christians make out, like, oh yeah, we totally should change that. I see it very much fulfilling the drive of Judaism. And therefore, no reason to be upset about Muhammad, really. But I sympathize with Christians who feel so squeezed between the rabbinic Jews who didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah and the Muslims who say Jesus was a great prophet but not the Messiah, so you shouldn't be idolatrizing him. And so they feel kind of uncomfortable in the middle there, and so that has made them have a bad history actually in dealing with both Jews and Muslims, which is too bad, I think. Really, I do.
Well, you say in the book that for some people walking the eightfold path can make them a better Christian, a better Jew, a better Muslim, and so forth, a Hindu.
Yes.
You feel that way, huh?
Absolutely. And for example, I used to translate for lamas in World Religion Dialogue, and I even had one wonderful lama, Tara Toku, the previous incarnation, who I got a loose grant for him, and he spent a year as a visiting professor at Amherst without speaking English, which gave me a double load because I had to translate all his courses for him as well as teach my own. But it was really fun, and we did team courses with Jochen Weinhoven, this wonderful guy who had originally been a Benedictine monk and then became a scholar of Judaism and, of course, Christianity, and quit being a monk and married, and then converted to Judaism, and, was very good in explaining back and forth. And, I know the ways that I think those educated through something like the Eightfold Path, the realistic worldview, is like what they miss in the sense that the Christian mystics, like someone like Meister Eckhart, who said that, who found himself having reached in contemplation the heart of God, which he said was like a desert, and where you were sort of eradicated, that's like realizing shunyata to me, And I even, in my dialogues with Peter Berger, the great sociologist, originally Jewish and then converted to Lutheranism, but really a great scholar, he challenged me to find a meeting point between shunyata and the Abrahamic religions years ago. And I did that, and I convinced him, actually, in the sense that the God whose name you can't pronounce and whose there's no idol for is like a shunyata type critique of localizing God in an idol in Babylon or Egypt or in some temple or pyramid, like the high God. It's just that statue, or God or goddess. And that is like a God is everywhere and everything, and we can't say what it is. And, it's bigger than any concept even that we have. Not that people of the book don't make an idol out of their scriptures, which they tend to do, of course, because ordinary people always have to have something to hang on to. But the idea that God is beyond your ken, actually, in a way, which is the Abrahamic breakthrough, if you will, in the Middle East in ancient time, I think that's just like the Shunyata breakthrough, very similar.
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly, most of our listeners probably know, but Shunyata is emptiness. And Bob, I wanted to ask you about that because
yes, sure.
In the book you decided to use the word freedom. Can you explain that?
Well, yes, because the word free is actually, the emptiness is, the only reason for emptiness, it comes from a verb root, shvi, which means to swell. So a seed, when it moistens in the ground, planted and moistens, it swells up. And then in the empty space there, the germ of it can start producing, patterns that will build the tree or the rose bush or whatever it is. So it's a kind of pregnant, it's a womb kind of concept rather than a nothingness concept. And Nagarjuna's famous famous phrase, adapted from the Transcendent Wisdom Sutras, where emptiness, the womb of compassion, he calls it. Shunyata Karuna Garbham. And the males in India and Tibet and China, they want to say Buddha nature, they call it, but actually it's Garbha. So it's a Buddha womb. So everybody, even the males, have a Buddha womb. But they didn't want to say they had a womb, so they say nature, And but that means that you have you're a nurturing membrane. Your openness of mind and body and soul is a nurturing membrane for your eventual embodiment as a Buddha. You're achieving a Buddhahood, so anyway, so it's a negation. And as as everyone knows, that negation is a kind of cognition where your mind actually opens. Like you look for an elephant in your room there in the James Shaheen study, and you don't find one, but you don't find a non-elephant. You just don't find the elephant that you were looking for. So your mind is open to look at the books that are in there or whatever else is in there. Your mind is not closed around as a positive or what seems to be a positive cognition. So that's all emptiness and selflessness and signlessness and wishlessness and whatever all these negations are. And free is a negation. We say salt-free, sugar-free, trouble-free, paint-free, taint-free. And that means lacking. It's just like less. But when we say freedom, we think it's very positive. Oh yeah, George Bush said, "Oh, they hate our freedom." But meanwhile, freedom is no particular thing. It is just an absence of bondage and slavery and whatever. And then what you're going to do with the freedom? What's the freedom for? And the freedom is for love and compassion in Buddha's case. So actually, freedom is, and the word for nirvana, cessation. These just mean, these are negations, Nirodha, Nirvana, they're all negations. Because that's the point. Something that you can't wrap your mind around with a formula, a name, a symbol, but is a reality that is overwhelming. For that you can only describe via negation. And so therefore, if you don't want to scare people, which Buddha did, he used to scare them with selflessness and emptiness, because he did it for people who are very rigidly attached to a sense of absolutely I'm the here and I'm the center of everything and I'm me and I'm this. So he wanted to kind of shock them, by constantly saying self. You're actually selfless. And then a lot of people misunderstand it to mean you don't have a self and you don't exist. But he didn't mean that. He meant you don't have a fixed absolute thing there. You are a process. You are a changing identity, not an identity. Identity means sameness. But you're a constantly changing agent in life. But you're not fixed as an absolute thing. So selflessness, emptiness, freedom, these are all things that describe how we really are living. And we're free to take choices in our mind. We're free to make choices in our acts. And therefore, we're responsible for things. We can't say and there's no other absolute bossing us around, which is the critique of monotheism, a creator God concept. Because if anybody was an absolute, then they couldn't relate to us, because absolute means non-relative, in fact. So it's just a kind of way of making emphasis to say God is absolute or anything is absolute. It's like it may have been emphatic, like when you say, would you like a cup of tea? And you say, absolutely. But, you're not going to be able to drink that tea if you drink it absolutely. You have to drink it relatively, So that's Buddha's great thing, you see. He examined everything that his peers and most cultures are doing by kind of reifying their ideas of some sort of ultimate thing into a sort of an absolute that either controlled you or you could escape into or you could deal with, and was very important to discover what it was so you could move from the relative to the absolute, because it was in the relative that things banged into you and you suffered. So he critiqued that, and emptiness means that this relative is the absolute, which means that making it nice is the absolutely most important thing to do. So that means love is absolute, actually. And being, seeing a smile on James's face is of absolute importance. And not just, and it's not like, who cares what his face is like? I'm going off to a meditative state somewhere else where I'll just ignore everything. That we can't do, or I belong to some being that is absolute, who's going to take me and put me somewhere if I just keep repeating his name, and that's not realistic.
Okay, Bob. We don't have a lot of time. We'll go a little bit over since we started late, but we have listeners writing in questions. So
okay, good.
Okay,
good.
It says this question is from Michael Sean. He says, there is a tremendous interest in meditation and personal development work around trauma and the nervous system these days, along with spiritual bypassing. Do you see resolution to this through the wisdom of bliss?
Yes, and I do, because but with someone who's heavily traumatized, it will take a little while. But actually, there's a proof. For example, right now, the generals in the U.S. Army are insisting that the government reclassify things like MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin as psychotherapeutically useful medicines, rather than Schedule 1, horribly dangerous, addictive, blah, 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 all the things that where Nixon put them, 50 years ago. And they're doing it because MDMA, which is known as like the bliss drug, right? And because when they use it on PTSD, traumatized soldiers and things, a few sessions that are guided by a therapist, not just jumping in the street or riding a motorcycle or going to a dance, but a few sessions in a guided way, make them much more able, find some sort of inner bliss that's in themselves that makes them sort of relativize, let's say, gradually over a number of sessions through therapy, accelerate a therapy about not making the horror of some kind of experience that they had be this absolute thing, actually, that crowds them out of living a regular life. And so, although it's not like they're going to say, oh, wisdom is bliss, then fine, I'm no longer traumatized. No, but it's like realizing that the great healing resource that every human being has is their own inner bliss, which actually, from a deep Buddhist neuroscientific point of view, which I call, I have another strange expression for people. which I call Tantric Abhidharma. And this relates to, I didn't much write about this in the book because I didn't want to get much into Tantra, but a little bit in the chapter about psychology I did, but in Book of the Dead and this kind of thing. But the point is that when I was in my early 30s, which is when in the sort of Tibetan tradition, which I was coming at from my 20s, you're supposed to do Madhyamaka and all this philosophical stuff only, learn stuff, so that when you meditate, you don't get lost in some separate place, but you keep it connected, so you learn and you develop strong critical understanding and unlearn also a lot of things from your culture. And then you start to practice Tantra in the 30s is the ideal way, they say. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to practice. And then I found there's a huge study involved in Tantra. There's an enormous literature. The whole canon that is translated into Tibetan, coming from Nalanda University, Vallabha, Vallabhacharya University, Ratnagiri, all of the many great Buddhist universities in India, it is half or more than half tantric treatises, not just scriptures, or like short things like just be here now or something, which the Siddhas write that sort of thing, and they're considered valuable, and they're there. But there's a huge amount of technical things about the central nervous system, that's the whole chakra system, central channel, the way that the different levels of within the whole body nervous system work, and how they connect to different meditations and different practices and different understanding. And it's really amazing stuff. And but the deep theory is that the life energy of the human being, because the life energy of life itself, what they call clear light of the void, is bliss. And it is contentment. And it's like when you feel welling up, even when you meditate something else, and you reach a kind of place where you get your mind out of the way temporarily, and people will feel a welling up feeling, kind of floating feeling in their thing, because they've stopped sort of worrying and nagging around in the mind and being all focused on what their inner narrative, and instead they're kind of calm. And what that is the natural inner energy, which is the openness of the nervous system to the life energy. And that is bliss, and that is the source of health. It is the source of overcoming trauma. It is the source of having a healthy and long life. And it relates to love and altruism, and also all kinds of helping excel physically in all kinds of ways, good for sports and what have you. Buddha always said in Pali and Sanskrit, in whichever language, in whichever treatise, about things, he would be giving a teaching, and then he'd stop and he'd say, well, yes, and this, if you understand this teaching, it will help you now, and it will help you hereafter. So in other words, a really, really good teaching is not against what happens to us now, and it will lead to long-term nirvana eventually, is what they mean, but it will also help in dealing with life. And so I would say to Sean, if that was his name, Michael Sean, was it? Yeah, Michael Sean. I would say that the sense of, and that's actually good. That's a good question. My deepest motive in writing this book, going on thin ice in terms of some Buddhists actually, who'll be maybe annoyed about it a little bit, and for calling their noble truths friendly, fun facts, they might be a little irritated by that and feel I'm being Pollyanna-ish and la. But one of my main motives is I consider that we humans are terrorized by our cultures into thinking that reality is scary and bad, and therefore we have a slogan in English, ignorance is bliss. We don't want to know what reality really is, because it would make us too unhappy. It's too awful. And, even secular atheists who think they won't have a future life and will be nothing after death, they purport to themselves to be scared of that, and because they're scared of death. But I don't believe that anybody's scared of nothing. Everybody wants sodium pentothal when they're in deep pain. They want to get out of here, and they don't care. As long as they're guaranteed to be insensate, they'll be happy. And the only reason you'd be scared of, even if you think it's nothingness, is if you're not sure that it's really permanent nothingness. And if you, Carl Sagan, are like subliminally scared that when you have no consciousness and no independent ability to move or act, you might wake up in the alien spaceship, giving birth to one of those bubble and
Okay.
new alien.
Well, we just have maybe just 2 minutes left, and maybe it's impossible to explain. But Janet Scheffner asks, "What is the mandala behind you?" Or she says, "What is behind you on the wall?"
Oh, what the thing behind me, which I love, which I got in 1971, I had painted for me, is the Chakra mandala. And at the time I got it, I had a signed document to the monastery. I would never show it to anybody, and I would never. I was like, I would keep it top secret because it's the recipe of how they make the powder color particle mandala that they make with the little cake decorating little bit of things that they do. And I love it, and it's in my study, and I have it, and I like to show it off because I think it's wonderful and beautiful. And I don't care if people don't ask about it; and they just see it's like a Tibetan thing. And but the thing is about it, because when I first saw it as a color particle mandala in 1964 in Dharamsala in the springtime when they make one every year, then they used to in those days, and they did a little mini Kala Chakra every third lunar month, waxing moon. My Walter Cronkite voice in my head spoke to me. I call it my Walter Cronkite verse, not George Burns and not anybody else, Walter Cronkite, and said, "If human beings can make anything that beautiful, enlightenment must be possible."
Okay.
And I thought, okay, I thought, that's really nice. Thank you, Walter. That's the way it is, CBS.
Well,
and
that's a great.
I love it. That's what it is. And the mandala means a place where your mind is protected in an essential way, with the essence not being an absolute self, somehow apart from everything else, but the essence being the flow of love of the really open-minded person who feels natural love and feeling of empathy and compassion with other beings and is truly altruistic. That's the essence.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was wonderful. I just want to remind everybody there's a link to Bob's new book, Wisdom is Bliss, in the chat field. So thank you, Bob, for being with us here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us in this conversation. It's always fantastic to see you, Bob.
Thank you.
We are providing this event for free. So if you want to help support this and our other efforts, please consider donating at tricycle.org/donate. I believe the Tibet House link is also in the chat box. We'll send a follow-up email with the replay link if you'd like to watch the session again or share it with friends. So again, I advise everyone to pick up a copy of Wisdom is Bliss.
I also want to thank you. I want to thank you, James, for having me on and talking about my book. And I also want to generally thank Tricycle, which I deeply love. And actually, I and Professor Nagatomi were two very early preliminary advisors to Helen Twerkov, your founder. And I was always frustrated being so busy that I couldn't do more advice, actually. And now that I'm retired, I hope you will turn to me if you ever have any problems and you need advice.
That's a very good.
Because I think it's a wonderful magazine, and you've done a wonderful job over practically 50 years now. I don't know, 40 maybe. I don't know exactly how long, but 40 or 50 years, I would say, almost. I remember
it's been 30. It's been 30 when you first sat around the table with everybody thinking.
Oh, was it only 30? No,
only 30. I know.
Really, I thought it was definitely founded in the 80s, which would be.
No, 40. It was 91. It was 91.
That it was really? I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Well, usually
I'm going to take you up on your offer, and we want to interview you finally about the great book on Vimalakirti that you wrote years ago. Our executive editor and I would like to sit down with you and talk about that.
I know you've been saying that for years.
I know, but they're bugging.
I know how we are.
We got to do it.
You see, I'm even like that as an emeritus retired professor, because I went to take Al Gore's training of Climate Reality Project. And I am very much a devoted disciple of Greta Thunberg, and as is His Holiness. And I have great-grandchildren as an ex-monk, and I can't bear to leave this planet with it in such a mess. And so I'm very, very devoted to that. So I find myself really busy as well. And also the Tibetans are still in the soup with the Chinese genocide attitude and doubling down on ridiculous. They haven't managed to genocide them in 70 years. They're not going to manage this time, but they are doubling down to try, stopping them from learning their language or saying they're trying to, etc. And it won't work, and it's very sad. But because this is going on, I remain really, really busy too. I don't have
we'll pin you down. We'll pin you down. Phil Ryan, one of our editors, and I will get a hold of you, and we'll sit down and do it. But anyway, I really
you must come to Menla. You must come up to Menla, and we can take a little time. Because I'm really in the city now. I'm really upstate in the Catskills.
Yeah, I know.
And the Menla Mountain Retreat. Come and see me there, and you can have a massage after we talk.
Oh, I'm there. Okay, fantastic, Bob. Thank you so much, and
all right, and thank you, and all the best, all your listeners. Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, Wisdom is Bliss. There it is. I like the cover too. Nice orange color.
Yes.
For an ex-monk. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sierra Figueroa, who organized, and thank you, James. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Are you reviewing the book, by the way? I hope. In writing?
Well, we're going to do something with it online.
I hope
it'll be there. Okay.
All right. Take care.